Hello, everyone. Welcome in. We're at the end of week 8, so we have spring break next week. Right? No class next week. Now, we just finished the midterm yesterday, a couple days ago. Nice work, folks. The average turned out to be like 86%. So, uh, for folks who have deductions on certain questions, there should be feedback on it. So, go ahead and open up your exams and then take a look at each individual question. There should be feedback. Right? The feedback is pretty concise. So please let me know, in the discussion forums or over office hours if folks are interested in more detailed feedback. I'd love to go over how to do these problems. But yeah, please post anything in the discussions or see me in office hours or schedule a Zoom appointment and we could go over certain questions together. So yeah, nice work, folks. Average was pretty good. Today is going to be kind of a optional day. We're going to be doing Python in a different style. Right? So the reason why I say it's optional is because I'm going to switch to a different environment in just a bit. But this topic is going to be especially useful for folks who are going to move on to the next class. Right? So this is Intro to Python. The next class is Python programming. Right? It's a step up. So today will be especially important for folks to kind of get used to a different environment so they can get ready for the next class and also practice, right? Like in the industry, sometimes you're not going to be using notebooks, right? You're going to be using Python in a different environment. So please stick with us if you're interested in this stuff. Lately, or this whole time, we've been doing Python in a Jupyter lab environment. Right? We've been going to this website, which is hosted at Cabrillo, and kind of pressing the play button on certain notebooks. Right? So this is not really classic programming, in my opinion. This is more like writing small blocks of code and then pressing play. On top of that, we need internet in order to program, right? So basically, your computer needs internet, and the Cabrillo server needs to be on, right? So there's a couple drawbacks to that, right? What if you wanted to develop Python locally, right? Locally meaning that what if you didn't have internet access, or more specifically, what if you didn't have access to the Cabrillo server, right? We should probably find a way to develop locally and move away from this Jupyter lab. Right, so let's do a different type of programming. Right, so I'm going to kind of build up to it. Right, I'm going to avoid notebooks for now. So here, I'm going to make a folder here called examples, right, and write some classic, write some pure source code. So I just didn't, I made a folder called examples, and I'm going to make a file in here. Right, so let's just keep it simple. I'm going to make a file. I'm going to call it hello.py. Right, hello.py. Okay, there we go. So this is not a notebook, right? If I go into here, the hello.py, this is just a pure blank text, right? It's a file with nothing in it. So we can actually type Python into here, right? So hello.py, the .py signifies that we're working in a Python file, right? Not a notebook. So just keeping it simple for now, we can do stuff like print hello world. Here, let me zoom in a bit. Print hello world. Right, this is probably one of the first programs you'll see. And then we need to save this file, right? So I'm going to save it. Control S for me. So Control S, there we go. I saved it. We can run this file. Right? This is a source code file. There's no play button. Right? There's no play button in this. It's not a notebook. So we can run the file by loading up a terminal. Right, so check this out. I'm going to open up a terminal here. So new launcher on the right. And then I'm going to go down here and open up a terminal. Right, this is a way of interacting with a computer. Okay, there we go. So we have two tabs open. Right, we have the source code and a terminal here. Right, let me just place them side by side so it's a little easier to read. I'm going to place them side by side vertically. Okay, there we go. So I just moved the tab down, right? The source code is up here, and we're here. Right? If you're familiar with Linux commands, you might kind of know how to navigate this terminal. But all you need to know right now is that this terminal on the bottom is inside of the correct directory, right? So the thing I highlighted right here is signifying that the terminal is working inside of this directory, right? The examples folder that I just made. So if you do an ls, right? Ls means list all the files in the current working directory, right? I'll type in ls and then enter, right? It says, oh, okay, we have hello.py. Right? ls is one of the first commands that you'll learn in a Linux class. But once again, this is not a Linux class. You don't have to know this. All I did was type in ls to verify that our source code is in this directory, right? It is. So we can run this file, right? There's a command called Python, right? Python and then space, the name of the file that we're gonna run, right? So I typed in Python space hello.py. Okay, and when I press enter, right, it says hello world, right? This is the output from the print statement. Right, so this is kind of like a alternative way of writing source code, right? We're not pressing the play button anymore. We're writing text files and then running it with this command. All right, let's build on top of this, right? Let's edit this file to make it do a little more, right? So maybe let's do some functions, right? So a few weeks ago, you might have remembered that we did a greet function, right? Like imagine if we said greet Bob, right? This is not going to run yet because we didn't define this function, right? So just to verify that, if I were to save this file, right? So it's important to save it, right? So I'll save it and then rerun it, right? So I'm gonna type in Python hello.py again, right? It's gonna give us an error, right? So this error is the same as the notebooks, right? It's saying a greet is not defined. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So we need to define this function, right? You might remember we defined a function called greet that takes one argument, right? Like a name, or a string, and then all it does is it prints it back out, right? Like print hello name. Okay, hello name, and then let me just do another print statement. How are you? Okay, cool. So we have a definition of a function and a single invocation, right? A single call. So I'm going to save the file again, right? Because I made changes. So Control S, save it. Okay, now I'm going to rerun it. So Python hello.py. Right, so it's going to run this greet function. So hello.py, enter, and it says, hello, Bob, how are you? Right, once again, this is just the equivalent of pressing the play button. There are some hard-coded things in here, like this string right here. Right, so, lately in our notebooks, we've just been modifying the things within the cell. But, you don't really have to hard-code this. So in the, generally, when we write programs, it can take some sort of inputs, right? Like, what if we wanted to interact with the program, right? Like, pretend that we're writing a chatbot, right? Imagine we're writing a chatbot and we're kind of talking with it, and it'll respond back to us. Right? So in the future, we're going to see a command, a function called input, right? That there is a function called input that takes a string, right? It does two things. It's going to print something. So I'm going to say, what's your name? Right, and let me just delete this right here. So this function does two things, right? It's going to print the string that we input, and then second, it's going to wait for the user to type something in. Right, so let's see what's happening. So I'm going to save the file again, and then run this here. So Python hello.py. Right, so I just pretty much press the play button, and now it's saying, oh, what's your name? Right, so we're waiting for input right now. Right, the program is stuck inside of this function, it's waiting for me to type something, right? So when I type in Andrew, right, and when I finally press enter, right, this function will finish, right? It'll finish, and that's it, right? Nothing else happens, right? So that's the end of the program. It just asks for the name. Okay, this function does return a string, right? It returns what we typed in. So we can store that into something like let me make a new variable so we can store that return value, right? Like let me name it someone. Right? It doesn't matter. Basically, this variable is a string that stores this return value. Right? So then we can grab that return value and just greet based off of that someone. Right? So I'm going to save it now. So save, okay, and then rerun it. So here, let me just clear this terminal so it looks a little neater. So clear, okay, there it looks a little neater. So I can run the program again, right? Python hello.py. Right, this is pressing play. Press enter. Okay, then it says, "What's your name?" Right. So we are stuck inside of this function, right? So when we type in like Andrew, and the second I press enter, right, this function will return a string. So I'm gonna press enter, and there we go. I typed in Andrew, press enter, right, and then now we're greeting that person. Greet someone. All right, hope people are cool with this so far. Right, this is not a notebook. We're writing source code. All right, so let's move on. We just introduced a way of writing source code, but we are still connected to the Cabrillo server. Right? We're not really developing locally yet. Right? First of all, if the Cabrillo server were to go down, then you wouldn't really have access to this environment. So sometimes you want to develop locally. Right? Locally means that you're on your own client device and programming from there, right? Instead of connecting to some external source. So this is the part where I'm going to introduce a integrated development environment, right? It's called VS Code. Right? You don't have to use VS Code. You can think of Visual Studio Code as a text editor, right? That also comes with a terminal. So if folks are wondering what this is a VS Code. So Visual Studio Code. This is one of the popular integrated development environments that a lot of beginner students use. Or actually not beginner students, a lot of the industry uses this software. Right? It's a source code editor developed by Microsoft. Right? It's just one program. Right? So if you're interested in using this on your own device, you can download it. And it's available on Windows, Linux, and Mac. So it's pretty compatible with a lot of things. Right, so I just downloaded it, and I have the text editor right over here. Right, this is the text editor. I'm now local. Right? I'm not connected to any environments. Right? If my internet were to go down, I can still be working in this text editor. Okay. If you're interested in this, feel free to let me know during office hours, and I can help you get set up with a local environment. But pretty much we need a Python environment too. I already have the Python environment installed on this computer. But yeah, if you're interested in that, just let me know, and we'll get you all set up. All right, so this is the text editor, right? Meaning that we can open up a folder. So I already have a folder on my computer, right? It's called examples right here. Right, so I'm just gonna open up this folder, examples. And you see on the left right here that this is the file explorer, right? So there is nothing in this folder. Right, so I'm just going to go ahead and create an example. I'm going to create a new file. I'm just going to name it hello.py again. Right, hello.py. Okay, there we go. So now our folder has one file. Right, if you're curious what this folder is signifying, it's pretty much over here. Right, you can open up the folder. Right, see, this is what we're looking at. Right, I'm inside of a folder and it's got one file. So I'm just going to write the same exact thing. Right? I'm developing locally now. Right? So I'm just going to copy and paste this stuff right here, just because we already wrote it. Okay, so copy and then paste. Let me zoom in a bit. Okay, there we go. See, there is our source file, right? It's got some code, and we can go ahead and run it, right? So it's important to save it first because this file is still considered empty. So I'm going to save it, right? You can go here and press save, or you can press Control S. Right, there we go. We saved it, but how do we run it? Right, so VS Code comes with a terminal, right? So I'm going to go here, click on terminal, new terminal, and then it's going to load up a terminal. There we go. Right, it's going to look different based off your devices, but we see that this terminal on the bottom is inside of the correct folder. Right? I created this folder before class, right? So examples, and if I do an ls, right? ls means list, right? It's going to list hello.py, right? Which we're just verifying that we're in the right folder. We can run this with the same command, right? Python hello.py, right? And then enter, what's your name? And I'll say like Andrew space tac, enter, and there we go, right? It did the same exact thing. Right, so the difference between this Visual Studio Code and this Jupyter environment is we're developing locally here on the right. I can disconnect my internet and still run this. Okay, let's do a longer example and put everything together. Right, so here, let me make a new file. Right, so I'm done with this file. Let's make a new program. Right, like, let's pretend we're rewriting the weather assignment. So your most recent assignment or project was the HTML weather. Right, so this is going to be a pretty cool example because we're going to see a sneak peek into the next material. Right, the next material after spring break is going to be stuff on file input and output. So this is going to give a really cool sneak peek. Okay, so I'm going to make a new file here. Right, new file. Let's just call it, I'm going to call it HTML weather. Yeah, HTML weather .py. Right, so .py, so we signify it's a Python file. Okay, there we go. So there is our empty file. Right, there's nothing in here yet. Right, but check this out. If I go in the terminal and press ls, type in ls to list the files, right, we see that there are two files here now, right, which makes sense, right? That there are two files in this folder. Right? And if you're wondering what's happening, it's pretty much like this right here. Right? See, we got two files. One is called hello.py and one is called HTML weather. Okay. So you might remember in our previous assignment, we wrote some functions to get the weather data. Like I have a partially implemented project right here. So HTML weather. Okay, so I'm just going to load up this notebook from a while ago. This is project 4. All right, this one, all it did was download weather data and print it out on an HTML table. And so imagine that we were to kind of write this in a different environment, right? Like all of this stuff here, right? And then the display. So let's copy some code over. Right, so here I'm gonna copy this stuff over here. Right, pretty much the stuff I'm copying is we're downloading the weather and then creating an HTML string. Right, that's all that's gonna happen. I'm not gonna copy this part here. This line of code is actually it's actually more proprietary. Like it'll only work with the notebooks in a way. Right, so I'm just gonna get this download and the string builder. So here it is. I'm gonna paste it here now. So paste. Okay, there we go. So I just pasted it. Let me zoom out a bit. Okay, I just pasted it. So this is the first line of code, get weather, and then here it's going to build a string, right? And then for now, I'm just going to print it back out. So at the bottom of this code, I'm just going to print out my HTML, right? This is the string that was built here. So here, let's test this, right? So I'm going to Control S to save it and then run it, right? So Python HTML weather.py and then enter. Okay, we got an error here, right? Folks might have seen this error before, right? It says get weather is not defined. Right? You might have seen this in your notebooks, and all you really had to do was press play on the definition. We don't have a definition for get weather here, so that's why we're getting this error. So we have to copy over the code for the weather definition, the function. Right? This is not existing, so I'm going to go ahead and paste it over. Right? It's this code over here. So copy, right, this is the definition of the function. I'm going to paste at the very top. Okay, there we go. So at the very top of the file, I just pasted this definition. Right, I'm going to collapse it for now. So that there's VS Code comes with a collapse button. So I'm going to press collapse, and there we go. So just to make it look a little neater, right? The code is still there. Okay. So I finally defined the getWeather function, right? Meaning that this line of code should work. So let's go ahead and see. So make sure to save it. So Control S to save, and then I'm going to rerun it. So Python HTML weather.py. Okay, there we go. So we just ran it. Right? See, scrolling up a bit, I ran the program, and then it printed out the HTML. Right? You see this print. So this is all happening from the print statement. All of this stuff. Right? Just to kind of give a sneak peek into the next lesson. Right? The next lesson is going to be on file input and output. Right? So we can actually output this into another file. Right? For folks who are into web design, you might have seen HTML files. Right? So you don't have to note this yet, but in the next lesson, we'll see something called a file handle. Right? So I'm creating a file handle that's going to open up a file. Right? It's going to create a file. So I'm going to say open. Right? This is a Python function that will open a file. Right? So I'm going to name the file webpage.html. Right? So this function is saying, hey, open a file called webpage.html. Right? And then I'm just going to open it in write-only mode. Right? So this next argument is a W, which means that we're going to be writing data into this file. And then as a good programming practice, I would usually close the file handle as well. Right, once again, we'll see this in a couple more weeks. Right, closing the file handle means to pretty much press the X button. Right, it's quitting the file so we can access it again later. Okay, so check this out. We can actually do a file handle .write. Right, .write is a function that will dump data into the file that we just opened. Right, so I'm going to dump the data into here. Right, the data is my HTML. Right, this is the string. So this is going to put the string inside of this file here. Right, so check this out. I'm going to run it now. So I'm going to save it and then rerun it. So Python HTML weather. Right, and check this out. Check this out. When I press enter, there's going to be a new file here on the left. Right, it's going to generate something. So enter. Right, okay, there we go. So I just ran it. Right, it didn't output anything. Right, there's no print statements in this program. Right, but it did do something. Right, it created a file here called webpage.html. Right, so this file looks like this right here. Right, this is pretty much printing the data into this file. So here's the cool part. Right, here's the cool part. If we open up the folder here, so I'm going to open the containing folder. Right, so this is the folder we're working in, the examples directory. Right, we have a new file here called webpage.html. We can actually open this in our web browser. Right, so I'm going to right-click it. My web browser is Firefox. Right, so I'm going to click Open in Firefox. Okay, so it it did open it, right? So on the left, this is my web browser. Right? You see what happened here? See, I opened it, and the website is using this file. Right? It's not on a website. It's just opening up an HTML file. So there's our table right here. Right? It's not as neat, but this is pure HTML right here. Okay. So yeah, pretty cool stuff, right? Pretty cool. So yeah, we just generated a file, and that dumps all of this data into it. So we can pretty much generate web pages now. All right, let's take this a step further. Right? Remember we had another HTML assignment? We had another HTML assignment that allowed us to do the city. So going back a bit, we had a project here that generalized the weather, and it allowed us to type in a certain city to find it. And so let's go ahead and implement this. Okay. So I'm going to grab some bits and pieces from here, not all of it. So, this program is hard-coded for this latitude and longitude. Right? Our previous assignment didn't hard-code this. Right? It allowed us to use any city, and then that city would be converted to a latitude and longitude. Right? So wouldn't it be convenient if we took input instead? Like, here, I'm going to comment all of this code out for now. So I'm just going to do the triple quotes, which is a comment, and then comment out everything. Right? So our program only has this definition. Right? What I'm trying to get at is, wouldn't it be convenient if we were to not hard code these latitude and longitude and were to ask for a city name? Right? Like what if we took input that said, what city are you interested in? So imagine that the program would ask for input, and we would type it in, and then it would generate a web page based off of what we were interested in. Right, so this, once again, it does two things. Right? It's going to print out this prompt, and then it's going to wait for input. Right? So once we type in something, it's going to return a value that we can store. Right? I'm going to store it in a string called query. Right? It doesn't matter what you call it. Right, so just to see what's happening here, I'm going to save it. Right, once again, there's really only one line of code in this program. Right, it's this line. So if I were to run it, Python HTML weather.py, right, it says, what city are you interested in? Right, so now we're waiting for input. So if we type in something like Aptos and press enter, this should terminate this function and store the return value into query. Right, so press enter. There we go. See, end of program. Right, so if you're curious what happened, query is a string that represents Aptos. Okay, so recall the previous assignment, right? We could gather the latitude and longitude from this name, right? Remember we had a function up here. It was called a find city. Yeah, remember we had a find city function which took in a city name, and then these state and countries are optional, right? But if we put in just a single city name, it'll deduce the city name, the latitude and longitude. Right, so let's go ahead and copy this code over. Right, we need to copy this find city code over, which is all down here. Right, so I'm actually going to copy this whole cell. This whole cell contains two functions. Right, it contains the find city function and the get weather. And so let me just copy those over and replace this old one. So here I'm going to delete all of this. I'm going to delete this previous function. So delete, and then let's go ahead and paste it. So at the top of the file, I'm going to paste it. Okay, here we go. So at the top of the file, right, there's some import statements. Here's a global variable key. Right? This key is used for the functions. And then there are two defined functions here. All right, I'm just going to collapse these real quick, just so it's easier to read. So collapse this function, collapse the get weather function. All right, so all I did was copy over the two functions. Right? These are helper functions that will allow us to generate the web page. Our goal was to use this find city function to deduce the latitude and longitude. You might remember that this find city function returns three things. Right? So if we put in the query here, right, the query is the string that we type in, right? And then the next two are optional, right? Remember the state and the country, right? These are optional, so I'm just going to leave them blank for now, right? But you might remember that this returns three values, right? It returns a name, it returns a latitude, and then a longitude. So this is saying, hey, call this function and store these three return values. So check this out. We can go ahead and print these. Right? It's a good programming practice to sanity check variables. Right? Sanity check variables means to print these values out so we can verify that they are the correct values. Right? So I'm just going to sanity check all of them. So just print the name, the latitude and longitude. Okay, there we go. So yeah, these three print statements are just verifying the return value from this function. All right, so let's test it. So once again, save it. Right, so Control S, and then rerun the program. Right, so here, I'm just gonna type it in again. So Python HTML weather.py. Okay, so all it's gonna do is get input and print out the results from the return value. Right, so enter. Okay. Oh, so I got an error here, by the way. So it didn't run. Right, we got an error on line 3. It says module not found. If you're curious what this means, this module is really exclusive to notebooks, right? Jupyter notebooks, and we're not really going to be displaying on our terminal, right? So I'm going to delete this line right here because this is really for it's really for displaying in Jupyter notebooks. So delete that, and we're not even using it. So let's go ahead and play it again. So press play, Python, and then there we go. Cool, so I just reran the program. There's no errors now. We're stuck inside of this function, right? What city are we interested in? So when I type in Aptos, we should be finished with this function, right? Query is a string that becomes Aptos, and then we're gonna use that query to gather this data, right? So here, I'll press enter. Okay, there we go. So I pressed enter on Aptos, and then here's the three print statements, right? The three print statements is verifying our return value. Okay, so here, let's test it again. Right? It's very good programming practice to keep testing as we go. Right, so here, let's test it with more. Right? Let me type in Tokyo. Right, Tokyo, and then enter. Okay, there we go. So it looks like it updated the name. Right? The name is Tokyo, Japan, and then our data is right here. Right, so it's looking good. Okay, we can use this data inside of the get weather function. Right, so here, let me get rid of these print statements because these are just for sanity checks. So I'm just going to get rid of them by commenting them out. All right. Earlier, we hard-coded the get weather with these numbers, right? But now we can use the return values from this latitude and longitude. All right, so check this out. I'm going to uncomment this out. So let me just remove this triple quote and put it down here. Right, so let's download the weather. Right, so this function is going to download the weather from the numbers we just got, right? Latitude and then longitude. Right, it's going to download the weather, and you might remember that this function returns a dictionary. So weather is a dictionary. Right? We can verify, right? We should sanity check that dictionary. So I'm going to print the weather dictionary out. Weather dictionary is, I'm just going to dump the whole dictionary here. Right? It's not going to be formatted, but we're just going to look at it to see if it looks good. Okay, there we go. I saved it, and then now let's rerun the program. Okay, what city are you interested in? I'll type in Aptos. All right, so and then enter. Okay, there we go. So I pressed enter, and then we use that query to get the latitude and longitude, and then downloaded the dictionary. Right, so the dictionary here looks like here. Right, it's not formatted, but this looks good. Right, it is clear right now in Aptos. Right, and we can keep trying it again. So here, let me test it again with a different location. Let me go Tokyo. So Tokyo, enter. And there we go. It's different. It looks like it's cloudy in Tokyo. All right. We just sanity checked the weather dictionary. We can use this weather dictionary to finally build our HTML string. Right, so this HTML string, we can now uncomment it. Right, so I'm going to uncomment this HTML string, right, which builds based off of this weather values. Right, so I just deleted the comment, and don't forget to delete the one on the bottom too. Okay, there we go. So now the whole program is uncommented. Right, so we're going to build an HTML string, and then dump that string into a file called webpage.html. Right, so check this out. Save it. Right, so Control S for me, and then I'm going to rerun the program. Right, Python HTML weather. Okay, what city are you interested in? So I'm going to type in Aptos, and then enter. Okay, there we go. So I press enter. Right, there's no output, but there actually is. Right, there is a file. Right, we can look at this file that we just created. Right, so here it is, and there it is. Right, so there is the HTML table. Right, it's stored in this file that we can open up. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up in my browser, which is Firefox. Okay, there it is. I just opened it up, and here it is again. Right, it looks the same. Let's update it to make sure that it is the same. I mean, to make sure it is generating correctly. So back to our source code here. Let me just add a header so we can kind of label what we're looking at. So you might remember in the HTML, we did H for header. All right, so just let me zoom in a tiny bit. Okay, there we go. So I just added a header, which is a title. All right, let me just put the name in here. Right, the name, this is a variable that we got from this fine city. All right, so let me just label it displaying weather for name. All right, so this is just a title. All right, so let's rerun it. So I'm going to save it and then rerun the program. All right, Python HTML weather, enter. Okay, what city you're interested in? So I'll type in Aptos, and it should have a title now. All right, so enter. Okay, there we go. It didn't look at do anything, but if we look at the brand new web page, right, we see that there is a header here now, right, displaying weather for Aptos. So now we can go ahead and open it up in the web browser. Open containing folder. Okay, there we go. I'm going to double click this because it's going to open up in Firefox. Okay, there we go. There we go. See, now there's our web page, right, displaying weather for here.
Hey, Andrew.
Oh, you know what? I didn't even have to. Oh yeah, yeah, Lisa.
Oh, I was just wondering why it says high 150.
Oh, I didn't convert this to Fahrenheit yet. I think this is in Kelvin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, here, let me double check if I converted it. This is a partially implemented program. Let's see, HTML weather. Let's see, high. Oh yeah, it says 150 because I hard coded it here. So I pulled this example from a long time ago, and yeah, that long time ago I just hard coded this 150. For other folks, it shouldn't be hard coded. It should grab the value from the dictionary. Okay, hope that makes sense. It's just a temporary placeholder. Okay, let's see. The cool thing about generating these files is that we don't really have to reopen it every time. Right? We can actually rerun the program, and it's going to refresh this web page. So here, let me rerun this program. What city are you interested in? I'll say Tokyo. And the second I press enter, it's going to refresh this file. Right? So press enter. Okay, there we go. So this got refreshed, meaning that if we go to our browser, right, and then refresh it. So I'm going to refresh here. There we go. You see, it said displaying weather for Tokyo. And then once again, there's a hard-coded 150 here, right? I hope folks can fix that. You just got to replace this with the value from the dictionary. So yeah, we can do more stuff like let's rerun this, right? Python HTML. What city are you interested in? And I'll go Miami, and then enter. Right there we go. Enter, and there you go. It refreshed the web page. So if we go here and refresh, there it is. The current weather for Miami. Okay, so just to sum up what we did, right? We moved away from a notebook, right? Instead, we're writing a whole source code, right? So this source code, all it does is it takes input, right? It takes input from the user, and then that input will be passed into these functions to download the correct data. Now, we actually do need internet to download this data, but we're not connected to the Gabriel server anymore, right? We're kind of developing locally. Okay, so yeah, the query goes into the helper functions. Right, these helper functions are here. I just collapsed them. So yeah, those are the helper functions, and then we generate an HTML string, and then dump that string into a file called webpage.html. Pretty cool stuff, right? So this is kind of like the workflow in a future class or other programming environments, right? Other programming environments is likely to not use Jupyter notebooks. Right, Jupyter notebooks, you're just writing small blocks of code and then pressing play. Right? But in my opinion, classic programming is writing files and then having them work together. Okay. So yeah, that's the Python in practice. I hope folks found this useful. If people are interested in setting up their environment on their local computer, please let me know. I'd be happy to help you out. Well, yeah, that's about it for today. Just a sneak peek into a more classic environment. Yeah, that's about it for today. This was a sneak peek into 2 weeks from now. Right, 2 weeks from now, we're gonna dive into this stuff right here. Right, what is a file handle? Right, what does open do? That's gonna be after spring break when we talk about reading and writing files. Okay, thank you all for coming, and I hope you all found this useful. Have a great day.
Thank you.